Afternoon and good evening to those of you joining us from other parts of the world. Welcome to the second event in our new series, Insights to Action. My name is Nora Anderson, and I am the Executive Director of Executive Education at the Carlson School of Management. The Carlson School is delighted to bring this new virtual series to you, featuring thought leadership and key insights of our faculty and industry experts. The goal of this series is to translate business research into practical knowledge for business leaders. This series is a partnership between the Carlson School's Office of Alumni Relations and Executive Education, and we are excited to welcome over 300 alumni and friends in attendance today. Our event today will focus on the digital revolution, transforming business strategy for 2021 and beyond. We're joined by Carlson faculty member Ravi Bapna and healthcare executive Sameer Badlani, who I will introduce in just a few moments. They will highlight 4 major trends driving the digital revolution in firms, as well as discuss the innovation required in an increasingly digital world. And of course, we'll leave time for questions. We have already received many questions submitted on this great topic. With that, it is my pleasure to introduce our panelists today. Professor Ravi Bapna wears 3 different hats at the Carlson School. He's the Curtis L. Carlson Chair in Business Analytics and Information Systems. He's also Associate Dean for Executive Education and the Academic Director of the Carlson Analytics Lab. Professor Bapna's expertise lies in helping companies reframe their understanding of analytics, AI, and machine learning, and then leverage that understanding for competitive advantage. Professor Bapna received his doctorate degree from the University of Connecticut. His research has been widely published, and his views are sought after by the Financial Times, Wall Street Journal, Minnesota Public Radio, just to name a few. I'd also like to introduce Dr. Sameer Badlani. Dr. Badlani is Chief Digital Officer and Executive Vice President for Technology Services at M Health Fairview. He's a healthcare and digital thought leader, leveraging his experience as a clinician and technology executive to transform the delivery and consumer experience in healthcare and wellness. Dr. Badlani received his medical degree from the University of Delhi in India, completed his internal medicine residency training, and served as chief resident at the University of Oklahoma. We welcome you both. And with that, Professor Ravi Bapna, I'd like to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Nora, and good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all of you wonderful alumni and friends all over the world. I'm truly delighted to have this opportunity to talk about a very hot topic, digital transformation. You know, it's a buzzword these days, and one of the questions that came from the audience, some of these were shared with me, is, what has COVID done to this? Has it accelerated it? And the answer is yes. I think we are, doing things that we probably would have done in 10 years within the span of a year right now. And I'm also delighted to, share this hour with all of you and with Dr. Badlani. And rather than sort of getting into, various slides and PowerPoint, we just thought we will have a conversation, and I will kick this off. I'll give you sort of, my framework for thinking about digital transformation, and then Dr. Badlani can tell us a little bit about how that's playing out in one of the largest healthcare systems in the world that's suddenly had to go to virtual doctor visits. We never imagined in the US we'd be doing virtual doctor visits, but I've already had a few with my doctor actually this year, and it works pretty well. So when you think of digital transformation, first of all, let's start with the why. Why should, is this just another management fad, that sort of comes on a daily basis or a weekly basis, or is this something more fundamental? And I would argue that this is actually truly, a fundamental shift in the way we go about, interacting, where firms and industries actually go out and interact with their stakeholders, their customers and their suppliers, right? And to motivate this, think about a few examples. Think about, for instance, think about a company like Ant Financial in China, right? They are a digital first, AI first company, right? A classic, digital first, AI first company. And what that means is that, Ant Financial can serve their 700 million customers with 10,000 employees, okay? And compare that with, let's say, a traditional bank, let's take Bank of America, right? Founded in 1924, employs more than 200,000 people to serve 67 million customers, right? So you see that ratio. So what's different about these companies, right? Actually, the fundamental difference is that Ant Financial uses software and takes its capabilities and uses software and AI and machine learning to deliver things in a very, very sort of efficient and timely manner, and sort of uses what's called the AI factory, so to speak, to actually go out and interact with the stakeholders, right? And coming closer to home, there have been really, really some fascinating stories I've been following the last year. Take a company like Home Depot, right? Home Depot actually, granted, a lot of people had time at home, and there were a lot of interest in doing projects of all sorts. But Home Depot, in Q3 of 2020, had a 23% increase in their revenues compared to Q3 of 2019. So they actually grew, right? The pandemic for them was a growth opportunity in over and above sort of the normal growth, right? So what is different? What is different about these companies? How are they changing their game? I would sort of point to four things, right? First of all, the key concept that you have to start with is that in the digital first world, the products and the services that you put out, right? For instance, take the Tesla that you buy or the Peloton that you buy. These are actually, the worst versions of themselves, right? So that's a very, very fascinating concept, because normally when you go out and buy a car, right, the moment you drive it out of the showroom, it depreciates by 20%, right? Now you have a product like a Tesla that basically the salesperson will tell you that, the Tesla you're buying today is going to be the worst version of itself. It's only going to get better with time, right? So how does that happen? Think about that, right? There is a newer connection between the product and the company, right? And that connection is data. There is a feedback loop now. As I drive the Tesla, or my friend drives the Tesla starts learning about, what our patterns are, how we use the product, right? And that data feeds back into algorithms that will then personalize that car for me, right? Much in the same way a Peloton would personalize my fitness experience, right? So this concept of, the product that you're selling is the worst version of itself is a very drastic, revolutionary concept, in my opinion, right? And many companies haven't quite wrapped their head around it, but we'll talk a little bit more about this. Point number two, every company is a software company, right? I will sort of go out and put that stake on the ground out there, right? So, even a large hospital system, a medical system, at some level now can think of itself as a software company. And what's unique about software, I've been studying software for the last, 20 years. One of the most unique things about software is that, it has zero marginal cost to reproduce, right? So if Ant Financial, builds an AI algorithm to predict, who's going to default from a loan, and uses that to decide whether to give somebody a loan or not, right? Once they build that algorithm and code it into a product or a service, they can scale in a way that you can't do with traditional humans, right? People making human-based decisions out there, right? The other thing about software that's very interesting is unbundling, right? Think about a company like Uber. Uber has actually unbundled the car, right? Instead of buying a car now, you can get rides, right? And every time software comes into play, it actually unbundles that. I was fascinated last weekend. I don't have a Tesla yet, so it's on my wish list. But my colleague and friend, Professor Gord Butch, who lives 2 blocks from me, has one. So he allowed me to ride his car the other day, and he actually told me that. So, and it has a perfectly working self-driving feature, right? So we were going in a 3-lane sort of road, and it was driving itself, no problem at all, right? And but God told me that actually there is a version of this which, if I paid a few dollars more, right, per month, I would get point-to-point self-driving, right? So I live close to Berry-McCusker in Minneapolis, and I could just press a button out there and tell the car, hey, take me to Rustica Bakery, and it would find the way. But I have to pay. So it's like buying software now. Like that car, there's a version of the car that has full self-driving, the car I drove had maybe 10% self-driving, right? And you can see the whole range of possibilities that open up once you think about your product as a piece of software, right? You can unbundle, you can version, and that's something that again is pretty revolutionary. And you think about that concept extending out into your firms, your products. Third point, biggest imperative for companies is to convert the data that they have into an asset, right? How do you do that? Analytics, machine learning, right? AI. These are the glue that connect business value to data, right? A lot of companies are sitting on tons and tons of data. They don't know what to do with it. Okay, we hear this a lot, right? And again, at the school, we do a lot of work through the lab that Nora mentioned earlier and through executive education, helping leaders understand the art of the possible with respect to using their data to convert that into an asset. Okay, so we can talk more about that. And my final point, really, and then I'll hand it over to Dr. Badlani, is that as a part of getting digital transformation going, you really have to think about changing your organization culture. You have to be much more agile. You're competing with the tech companies, right? We were working with a large financial services company in downtown Minneapolis, and one of the worries they had was, what if Google or Amazon, gets into wealth management, right? How would that change the game? And well, what's different about Google and Amazon? A, they have tons of data, and B, they know how to convert that data into an asset, and C, their culture is different, right? So at Amazon, you may have heard of the 2-pizza culture that Jeff Bezos put in, right? No team, should be bigger than what can be fed by 2 pizzas, right? And those decisions have to be made basically over that conversation. You have a lunchtime meeting, you go ahead, you make the decision. You think of that decision as a hypothesis, you experiment, you fail sometimes, it works sometimes, and you learn and you move on, right? It's not the classical HIPPO, which stands for highest paid person's opinion based decision making. Okay, so I'm going to stop here just to recap again. I talked about 4 concepts, right? The product that you put out in the market is the worst version of itself, because as people use the Peloton machine or the Tesla, and as that data loop between the product and the firm sort of gets more and more refined, the product will actually improve, the company will innovate, it will push out newer versions of that, right? It'll get more personalized, and all of this will be done at scale, because point number 2 is every company should be like a software company, right? Which means that you can replicate your capabilities at scale without adding costs. You can do versioning, you can do unbundling. Point number 3 is, have a mission to convert your data into an asset. And this is not easy, by the way, but there is a lot of help around, including at the U at your own school, at the Carlson School. So talk to us about that. And then finally, have this adaptive, organizational culture. It doesn't have to be 2-pizza. That's specific to Amazon. Amazon's a very particular company, but whatever version of that is, in Microsoft, they call it test and learn. In other companies, they have different labels for it. So this idea of, being agile is really, really important, right? So with that, Dr. Badlani, would love to get your thoughts on that.
Thank you, Ravi. That was wonderful. I made some notes and, appreciate the teaching there for sure. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to share some thoughts. So let me start by saying a few things. I don't own a Tesla. I prefer black walnut bakery to rustica, and I'll never buy a Peloton. And if I was in that 2-pizza meeting, then you will have very few other people who can join. So let's get that out of the way first. I'll reflect a little bit on Ravi's points, and then I'll share some of my thoughts as well. The point about Tesla is a fascinating one. I'm at a point in my life where I'm even wondering, should I even buy a car again? I want to drag out my existing cars that are now starting to turn into vintage cars, and for the occasion that I really need them, they're fine. So if you think about the digital disruption or just the sheer disruption coming in the market that Uber and others have brought up, is there are large swaths of people, much younger people, millennials, who don't even want to buy a car, and people of my generation who are saying, you know what, I probably will not buy another car again, because all my life it was what is that next car am I buying? What is that next gadget I'm getting in my car? And I don't think I've achieved any level of wisdom in my life, but I just don't see the need for it anymore. So if you are somebody in the automobile industry, that's a very disruptive market change. And are you ready to take that on? That would be one reflection. The other thing that I will share is that telehealth or video-based visits have been around for about 20 years. I had the opportunity to do my first one at University of Utah. I used to, be a research assistant to a cardiologist, and he used to provide services to the Utah State Prison. So, 20 years ago, I got to experience and do a telehealth visit. So it's been rather painful for many individuals in healthcare to watch how telehealth just never moved from this very niche product in healthcare when it has the ability to do so much. And Ravi's absolutely right. COVID jumped, pushed this maybe by 10 years. And at the peak of COVID, there were some service lines where we were providing, 60, 70, 80% of our services through the telehealth model. And at M Health Fairview, which is a joint clinical collaboration between the University of Minnesota physicians and Fairview Services, we started providing, we were providing asynchronous care pre-diagnosis. So if somebody had a UTI or an upper respiratory infection, you could go to our OnCare site, and there would be a set of questions that were based on a clinical pathway, and you would be able to get a lot of help without having to go to the hospital, wait in the parking, hope to see your own doctor and come out in a decent amount of time. Every health system struggles with the throughput of their patients. And on an average, we used to see about 2,000 patients a month. That was a good month for us in this platform. At the peak of COVID, we went up to 2,000 patients a day. Then we had our telehealth platform, which is the synchronous web-based care that Ravi mentioned, and that was a lifesaver for our patients and our doctors' ability to continue taking care of our community. And then we also have a platform called Get Well Loop that we were starting to create some pilots around cardiology care, so that once you have the diagnosis, you are able to go and get connected on the loop, as it's called, to be fancy. And, you basically got questions, you answered the questions. If you needed to talk to somebody, somebody called you. If you needed to have somebody interact a little more rigorously, all that happened asynchronously. Well, we expanded a lot of those capabilities to our COVID patients, because imagine being a COVID patient coming to our ED and being told you're not sick enough to be admitted. And in the early days of COVID, I'm sure that caused a lot of fear and concern for many of us. So, but to be on that COVID Loop platform through Get Well Loop and be able to be in daily touch with a caregiver. And the most amazing part for me is that our learners, our medical students and residents and fellows, were able to participate in direct care delivery through the Loop platform. So they stepped up magnificently, and was just such an amazing story for our collaboration. Now, if you think about the point that Ravi made, that Ant as a financial group can take care of 7 million customers with 10,000 employees, this was my example in healthcare. Typically in healthcare and most businesses, we tend to solution for problems by hiring more clinicians, by hiring more staff, by building more brick and mortar. But digital offers an alternate way where we can distribute that fixed asset in a way that we can serve more consumers and serve more customers. I think of that as separately, and if time permits, we will expand on that as well. If you take a step outside healthcare, the best example I can share about the disruption that is on us and how digital is an essential way to meet that on. If you cannot be like Ant and start a business that's digital first, there are companies in healthcare that are doing that, but I can't imagine a company like ours doing that. Just one day wake up and say, shutting down all our buildings and ORs and going to go to digital. That's not going to happen. People still need to come to the clinic and the hospital. is how Target and Sears reacted to the Amazon threat. So Sears went the route of, okay, we'll shut down some stores, but we're going to strengthen our product lines, and somehow, our consumer loyalty will see us through. Target, on the other hand, took a very thoughtful database design-based approach and started creating digital assets, consumer personas, and created a whole ecosystem of services that is digital, hybrid, and in brick and mortar, designed around specific consumer personas. And you can see the success that Target has had, and Walmart has done their own version of it. So that's an example of when your business is being disrupted. If you don't think of digital hybrid as potential solutions and only think of the traditional physical solutions, then you will be very challenged.
Great. Thanks, Sameer. I think those are really, really interesting examples. So since we started talking about Target, I think I just wanted to pick up on that. One thing that differentiates, I guess, Target from an Amazon, right? So is that Amazon essentially, uses a platform strategy, right? And I think that allows Amazon, for instance, to not only just be a e-commerce merchant and be a facilitator of e-commerce marketplaces, but get into video streaming and get into music and get into all these adjacent markets out there, right? Do you think, what do you think is the role of kind of this shift from product to platform, or from, so there's product to service, right? Which I was telling you a little bit about. I think Tesla is more like a service, actually, right? You buy the product, but you're, in some senses, you're going to always get newer features. And actually, by the way, the pricing for this also can be really interesting, right? It can be a monthly, service, like Netflix style pricing in some senses, right? And then there is also product to platform, right? Where now you are actually orchestrating an ecosystem. And do you think a company like Target or, and we had, the CEO of Best Buy talk to our friends on First Tuesday this month, can those companies also sort of transform themselves into sort of this platform, or could M Health Fairview become a platform in some ways? And what would it take, right? Because that seems to be, in some senses, the model of the future.
Absolutely. I think that has been happening for some time. It's now that it's, you probably got this much earlier, Ravi, but I think some of us are starting to see this add up in our own ecosystem. And, what I always try to do, and I would urge all the listeners to do, is when you are trying to understand what digital disruption or digital transformation means, just look around you. The examples are everywhere. You just have to take a step back and say, wow, this is so different from how I experienced it earlier. And I think businesses like M Health Fairview, Target, and others, the sooner they get to the mental mindset of thinking like a platform and start creating assets and complementary services around it, the better they will be to take on the disruption in the existing market. From one hand, the competition from other healthcare delivery systems in our case, and then the competition from big tech and pharmacy and CVS type players from the other side. And they have tremendous amount of money and data that they have been collecting on consumer behavior that they're able to deploy. And to your point, many organizations think of data as a way to produce descriptive reports so that they can run their day-to-day operations, versus thinking of it to be more like a diagnostic and predictive reports that can actually create a competitive advantage. And the true, opportunity is treat data like an asset that you can in itself monetize certain capabilities out of it. I think healthcare is starting to really wake up to that possibility and maybe experiment with it a little bit. But I do believe we have to be much bolder. The platform aspect in healthcare, I will expand on that first, and then I'll give my response to the retail and the banking industry. Is healthcare has to stop thinking of ourselves as the people who take care of you when you really fall sick and when you really need us, versus we are your partners in a wellness journey throughout your life, and we help you be the best version of yourself, and we help you thrive. Health systems that truly start thinking like that will find other opportunities to provide customer value from existing assets. Because I would love to hear how you define platform, but in my mind, a platform mentality allows you to capture more consumers, have more touch points with them, and then have the ability to unbundle your current existing suite of services and then provide more avenues of service from that same fixed base asset, just like Ant does so magnificently to your consumers. My favorite example is from Chase Bank. I was faculty at University of Chicago in the residency program and med school many years ago. And I used to go to my Chase Bank in South Loop, and it was a small branch with maybe 5 or 6 tellers. The line was always, 7, 8 people per line. And I grew up, going to the bank every Saturday with my dad. It was sort of a ritual. So I, just out of habit, I'm like, yeah, I'm a grown up. So I'm just going to start going to the bank for whatever reason every Saturday I can. And I would go there, and I still remember, if you did not have your account number and every piece of paper signed up, the teller would glare at you through her glasses and send you to the back of the line to figure it out. And that was just what you got used to. Now, when they had the 2008 crisis, a story that is probably well known in the management circles and the banking circles, but maybe not outside, is all the banks invested billions of dollars in digital data and design assets. And the output of that is what you now take for granted right now. On your app, you can almost do anything that is required. I recently realized that you can deposit a $5,000 check just from your phone, because I kept going to the bank and trying to do it. And the lady very nicely told me, oh, you don't have to do it. Now, it's not very often that I get a check of $5,000 in the mail. So, I didn't know about that. But we have gotten to a point that now, if for a reason I go to the bank, it's only once a year for some major transaction, I get very frustrated. Why do I have to go to a physical bank to do this? When I go there, the bank is empty. There's one teller and maybe now a couple more to help with the COVID flow. But pre-COVID, there is one teller. And they're so happy to see me. They run outside from their, desk, and they greet me. They offer me coffee, and I take my daughter just to replicate the experience I had with my father growing up. And they offer her, a lollipop. And then instead of standing at the teller, I go and sit on the couch, and she says, "What would you like to do?" And I give her my big transaction that I came for. And I'm, while at it, let's deposit this other check, and why don't you withdraw me $30? And she's like, "You just sit here. We'll take care of you." That has what has happened, that the consumer experience has become so different. And I'm doing the number 2 and number 3 just for fun. I only needed to be there for the number 1 task. I'm just, reminiscing of what it meant to go to the bank and try to get anything done. But now, because my bank treats me that way, I give them more business. And that's the concept that I think, maybe we can shift to, is the concept of consumer loyalty. Mm-hmm. I think in healthcare, we've had this premise that consumers will be loyal to their PCPs. I think that's dead. That was dead a long time ago. We have data to show that if you are a patient whose doctor is from a certain health system, your PCP, when you get really sick, you go to that same health system. You have that same health system's larger family's insurance plan. 30 to 40% of the time, our patients are cheating on us, is how I joke about it. They will go and get services for their medicines. They will go get services for their physical therapy. They will go get services for their vaccination wherever it's comfortable, wherever it's convenient. So when we talk about consumerism, we have to really take into account, just because you have a primary relationship with a customer, it does not guarantee you will be able to capture the revenue for every bit of their wellness interaction. And that's where the big tech and the CVS and the startup folks are coming in. Interesting conversation that I just want to share and hand over the mic to you is the chief strategy officer of a big pharmaceutical chain was speaking to a chief strategy officer of a big health system in Texas, and shared that the pharmacy company, not pharmaceutical, the pharmacy company is getting into chronic care disease, and sort of got a response of, I don't understand look on the face from the healthcare system CSO saying, why do you think you can handle it? This is very different from urgent care or, minute clinic and that kind of stuff. And their immediate retort was, I see a diabetic patient in my physical pharmacy or on my website 9 times a month. You are lucky if you interact with that diabetic patient even twice a year. That's what we are up against. So if you were a retailer with a platform and a digital mindset, every interaction you have with the consumer, you will figure out a way to upsell and cross-sell your services. In healthcare, we would like to believe that's an opportunity for us to close more clinical and quality gaps so that we delight our consumers with how well they are, how healthy they are, and when they fall sick, they have the best experience possible. And for that, a platform is absolutely essential.
Fabulous. I mean, I think there's a lot of very interesting ground you covered, Sameer, out there. So I think let me maybe even just try to summarize for the audience a little bit. I think this notion of having these lifelong relationships, right, is really key. I mean, this is, again, it goes back to where I started, right? You think about, the traditional model. I'm going back to like a product, right? You go out and buy, a washing machine, let's say, right? The manufacturer is like 5 steps away from the end consumer, right? Digital changes that equation, right? You don't have to, and if you have those sensors, if you have that data going back, right, just like the way it goes back in Tesla and goes back in Peloton to the consumers, right? I mean, I would take this example to us in higher ed, right? We should have a lifelong relationship with our students, for instance, right? Like, I mean, I mean, again, you can take the same, example, like maybe the MBA that graduates, should only get better with time with the help of, the U of M, for instance, right? I mean, and for that, we need to have that community, that connection back with the people and understand that, predict their needs and offer those needs, even before they know them in some senses, right? So I think this is, in some senses, we're speaking the same language, actually, in that sense. I think the other important point, which especially in the time of COVID, I think has really magnified to me, is the role of technology. Why do we have technology? It's actually to make our lives better, right? And I think you talked about that human connection that you had with the bank, right? So the fact that the bank can automate all those, very transactional kind of things, so that in the end, they can offer you a more personalized, humane connection, right? That will then increase the loyalty. That will then, create that sort of lifelong relationship. And I think, and then the technology sort of, enables that in some sense, right? So I think that's a very good purpose for people to have in the back of their mind, right? And then, I think, finally, it's sort of, in many ways, all of this sort of goes back to, again, treating your data as an asset. So one question I had for you, Sameer, and then maybe we can move to audience questions, Nora, or please jump in anytime you think is right, is, in your role in trying to make this transformation, right, in healthcare, which is, a very traditional industry, like, we think of our doctors in a different way than we think of any other, set of professionals we interact with, right? What has been your experience in making that change, right? I mean, I think the language that you speak is very much a language of, consumer friendly, sort of, let's say the top of the line, financial services, wealth management company or a retail company. But this is not the language I traditionally associate with healthcare, right? So what is the internal change, or what barriers have you faced in trying to get the culture of, let's say, company organizations like M Health Fairview and others that you've been associated with to change, to adopt this thinking? So could you speak to that perhaps a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. One quick reflection of what people think of doctors. So my mother-in-law is enamored with the fact that I'm a doctor, and I stopped wearing a white coat a long time ago. So when my daughter was about to be born, my wife is admitted to University of Chicago, and being the typical doctor, I'm like, yeah, it looks like the baby will be not around for another 2 hours. So I went on rounds, put on my white coat, and I went on rounds. So then my in-laws came over, and I met them at the entrance. And that was the first time after, 5 years of being married, my mother-in-law saw me in a white coat, and she just went, "You're a doctor." So I always laugh at, the reactions I get around what people think of doctors and, how that goes. But That aside, there are two elements that I would like to unpack, Ravi, to your question. One is the culture of how we think we need to solve the problems we have in front of us. And healthcare is absolutely challenged in thinking beyond our traditional metrics of success, thinking beyond our traditional ways of how we define value. I'm delighted to share that M Health Fairview is one of those rare organizations that is constantly questioning how to think about these things. We may not be expressing ourselves very digitally in the ecosystem pre-COVID, now we are, but there are so many things we have done in the last 18 months that I'm so proud of as a member of the team that I can talk about where we are starting to treat data like an asset. So one example is the AI algorithm that uses X-ray images to better diagnose COVID in patients than at a faster speed, and enables a radiologist, augments a radiologist to be able to get through their day with more efficiency and more accuracy. So that's a great example of data being used as an asset. Another one is we used an AI-based algorithm that Dr. Tignelli and Dr. Milton Mukes worked on, that was published in your university publications as well, that allows us to estimate the risk of a patient coming to our ED with COVID, and now we apply it to other patients as well, to give us a very objective number to say, should this patient be discharged or should this patient be admitted? So now we are enabling and augmenting a doctor's judgment with an AI tool to their subjective art-based and science-based medical decision making. The other thing that doesn't get talked about enough, though, Ravi, is this. Technology in healthcare has been applied very haphazardly. Take a look at electronic health records. They are probably the least usable form of softwares that you find out there. Why is it that in a banking industry, somebody who does not have years of education and training that a clinician has can navigate that system so easily? Why is it that, average human beings like me can create a profile on personalcapital.com, pull in all their account information, and start doing retirement planning to the level that probably meets 75-80% of the best financial planner out there? Not saying that I'm able to do it at that level, but I am getting, I feel that, the information that I'm able to pull in on that platform, and I didn't have to go to any training for that. Now, I get it. Healthcare is way more complex. Healthcare is way more unpredictable. You're dealing with a large variety of variables that don't exist in banking or retail. And those variables also come in a lot of unstructured manner. So I get those basic issues. But the challenge has been that neither the processes in healthcare nor the technologies in healthcare have been designed with the mindset of usability first or keeping the user in mind. And the first wave of consumerism in healthcare, which is about how to give the patient a better experience, has been done on the back of doctors and nurses and other workers. So when you truly think of a design-based approach and you open up any book, the first chapter is have empathy for the user. Well, in this case, the user is not just the patient. The user is also the doctor, the nurse, the other clinical staff, and every other staff in finance, operations, and IT that supports the healthcare delivery. So that's what I think has been a core ingredient missing in healthcare in general, is that the technologies that get created get applied too rapidly. And in some cases, federal mandates like meaningful use push things too fast, where we just had to get EHRs in and would not spend the amount of time that you would probably see retail and banking constantly do agile testing in their ecosystem to make sure this software really enhances the workflow. If it doesn't, let's deconstruct the workflow. Let's only do the things that make sense. Let's go back at it again, redesign the technology, and keep this agile deconstruction, reconstruction going till the outcome is satisfactory and a delight to the user, which in this case starts with the doctor, the nurse, and the other people who work in healthcare systems, and then is experienced as a materially different experience by patients and consumers out there. I think the patients, the investment, and the recognition of this gap is coming, but it's still not as much as I would like to see it.
Great. I mean, I think, again, just to summarize for the audience, you're hearing, I hope you're hearing fundamental changes in consumer behavior, right? And in fact, there's a whole generation of consumers that are out there now that expect things in a very different way, right? So voice, for instance, will become their primary mode of interacting with systems, right? It won't even be the smartphone going forward, actually, in some senses, right? You're hearing the story about sort of, moving towards a platform, right? So from classical like linear value chains to platform and ecosystems that you're playing in. We already talked about the value of data. So this, competition is changing. And then finally, I think this importance of the culture that needs to change to make this happen out there, right? So Nora, is it a good time to perhaps deal with some of the interesting questions that have come in from the audience?
That's perfect timing, Ravi. We have many questions coming in, both submitted in advance and some that are coming in real time. I'd like to pick up Dr. Badlani and Ravi and Dr. Bapna on that thread of technology. We have a question that just came in real time. Do you have any insights on the next up and coming technology? Everyone knows about R, Python, Tableau, but what are your insights on some of the newer technology that we might want to start learning to get ahead of the curve instead of learning about fading technology?
Sure. I mean, I can sort of jump in out there, and then would love to get Sameer's thoughts as well. I mean, I think I think the technologies, so to speak, that were mentioned. I mean, I think of them more as tools, right? So these are tools like like any craftsman, right? If you want to create something beautiful, you need tools, right? And there are a variety of tools that are out there that you can use to, let's say, craft a beautiful home, for instance, right? And I think that is so R, Python, Tableau, and so on and so forth. These are tools, but the what do you want to create? You want to create some value for business by which you do that by solving some problem that you identify. So actually, the real art is in identifying the right problems to solve, right? And having that intuition. So for a bank, for instance, where would they put AI first? Where would they use these tools first, right? If they have a debt side of the business, right? One of the biggest risk factors for them is they give a loan and it defaults, right? So can we use the last 20 years of data that we have to predict this default before it happens, right? At the time the person's applying for the loan, and use that to make a decision, right? So somebody recognizes that, and then then the tools can come in to solve that problem, right? And so I actually think that people should spend more time. Of course, you need to understand what the technology can do for you, right? As you know, Nora, at the Carlson School, we like to believe in the house of analytics. So we have a framework around this where we say that the foundation for the house of analytics is data engineering, right? So people who do this have to be really adept at curating data from multiple sources, integrating it, cleaning it, learning how to deal with the politics of organizations where data is siloed, right? And so that's really important. We have our 4 pillars in the house of analytics, descriptive, predictive, causal, and prescriptive. And then the roof of the house is about the translation of the analytics into business speak, into something that non-technical people can understand, being that change agent, managing that change, right? So I think if you think of that framework, then the tools sort of fit in wherever, I think, different faculty use different tools for different techniques. We're actually pretty agnostic to those, I think. But I think once you understand this, then you start thinking about, okay, what are the interesting problems I can solve, right? And then you work with people, like either in your data science team, or if you don't have one, you have to create that, or in your IT team, to find those people who know how to use these tools really well. And then you start seeing the magic in some senses out there, right? So that's my 2 cents. Of course, we can talk about where a lot of value is being seen. Like for instance, investors talk a lot about deep learning. There's a lot of value out there. There's some use cases for that, but that's a separate story. But I just want to get a quick response even from Sameer on this.
Yeah, it's a great question. And Ravi, my answer is very similar to yours. R, Python are not aging technologies. I think they're still very valuable and are not even close to maximization of their utility. Tableau is a platform that does analytics. It's a PI tool and can have capabilities like R and Python sitting in the background. I would focus more, just like you said, on how you will use these technologies and toolkits to do everything we spoke about. There is, however, one domain, I can't say this particular toolkit, but there is one domain in which tools are starting to show up, is intelligent automation and automation with emotional intelligence. Those are areas that I would keep an eye on if you are truly seeking to find the cutting edge of what will be applied. And there are some interesting examples of where call centers are being deployed with a collection of tools that can mimic human empathy, but provide it at a greater consistency and prescriptive precision than we can otherwise. So if you are seeking, an answer, to what exactly you asked for, that would be the domain I would keep an eye on. But exactly like Ravi, I care more about what problem are you solving and how are you solving it and what are the outcomes than per se about the tools that we end up using at the end of the day. Secondly, it takes a very long time to really maximize the tools we already have in place. So just trying to balance that point of view.
Thank you so much. Wonderful. We have another question here, picking up on threads from our conversation this morning around the intersection between technology and changing consumer preferences and behavior. So the question that came in was, thinking about the future of digital infrastructure in the medical industry, what part will be played by the integration of consumer log data from devices like Fitbit and the Apple Watches and other smartwatches?
That's a great question. So consumer generated data, which is different from consumer entered outcome. So the patient reported outcome, that's separate. This is just device data on any sort of device that we have on us, has been around for 10 plus years. And initially it created the exact problem that new sources of data create, is that there's such volume and variety that very few people are able to use it. But now there are a lot of use cases happening real time where having access to this data is starting to become more meaningful, because you finally have a level of a middleware that is able to digest this data, apply algorithms, and the previous answer of, oh, great, we have more data, let's show it to the good doctor and the good nurse, somehow magic will happen. And all that caused was cognitive dissonance and more distraction for the clinicians out there, took them further away from their patients. I want to stress a point that Ravi made earlier. The goal of all these technologies should be to give you more time with your consumer, to give you more meaningful opportunities to serve your consumer. And the same applies 10 times over in healthcare. So, it's a great question where we now have access to a lot of this generated data. People are getting better at crunching it, and then in real time using automation to guide consumer or patient behavior and achieving outcomes. Where I see this being applied differently now and in the near future is we are getting away from the concept of that everybody has to come to a hospital to get care. So that started getting disrupted about 15 years ago. And you saw a lot of care still continues to be moved from hospital, which is the acute setting, to the ambulatory setting, which is the clinic setting. Now we are starting to go from the ambulatory setting to a patient's home. So it's sort of like care anywhere. You can be in any part of your life and you will somehow get some access to care and guidance in that sense. So there are two concepts here that these devices help with. One is hospital at home. So if you're really sick, you don't have to be admitted, but we can handle a lot of your care while you are at home. And then the other one is hospital without walls, where you can get hospital level care in a setting that's not in the hospital. So urgent care through a platform, urgent care through video visits, and only when the urgent care has an element that requires physical interaction do we discuss, do I send that clinical asset to your location, or do you come to my location to receive that clinical care? And the data or the platform, the data or the sort of the infrastructure that holds it together is highly dependent on device generated data from patients.
Yeah, I love care anywhere. I mean, I think, the equivalent for that for us, like in the Carlson School is, in some senses, education anywhere, right? It's sort of this, omni-channel, version. And we, this year actually has been very interesting because we found that for certain audiences, I mean, I think, I think, we segment our audiences basically just by the program. So the undergrads, I think, definitely need to be on campus. There is just no question about it, right? So I think that social connections aspect is so important. But you look at the professional audience, or even some of the professional MBAs, for instance, or exec MBAs, delivering live online via Zoom works really well. Actually, people are engaged. They know how to sort of turn the video on and listen, and with that we can reach audiences all over the world, actually, in some senses, right? So I think that model of where do you deliver education, right? Is it in the classroom? Is it on the cloud? Is it in some sort of virtual format? And how we interact with our students and how we basically become partners in a lifelong learning journey, right? I think is something that we've been talking a lot about actually as well. I think, I think school and universities that get this right first are going to end up being the early winners, I think.
Absolutely, Ravi. And as you were speaking, a thought came to my mind is that universities, health systems, the sooner we realize that we want to be there for a larger portion of your learning journey or a larger portion of your cumulative health and wellness journey, and not just certain acute episodes. So I guess in education, that's when you show up for your degree is the equivalent of an acute episode.
Right.
And I often hear people say, you know what, it's not working on Zoom or video. People go off the camera and then they are distracted. I would humbly offer to all my medical school professors, just because I was in the class staring at you does not mean I was paying attention at you. So if I am distracted, I'm distracted. I don't need to be not in a physical presence to be distracted. It's what I want to draw out of my education. And education doesn't happen only in the classroom. It happens all the time. So, Carlson is a great example of, creating podcasts, webinars, trade publications. So omni-channel, as you said, we want to meet the student where they are. And that's the goal I think all of us are trying to get to.
Thank you so much to both of you for your thoughts. I have a question that was submitted in advance that I want to make sure we get to. We would love your thoughts on this question. What are some of the most effective means of reducing the digital divide in the US? So this question is framed of the digital divide in the US. If you would like to offer thoughts on the digital, reducing the digital divide globally, I'm sure that would be appreciated too, but I know this is a very, very important topic. We would love your thoughts on this.
Yeah, I would be happy.
Yeah, go ahead, Sanj.
Thank you, Ravi. I'm really passionate about this topic. So in healthcare, we have had two challenges from a perspective of the divide. Let's put digital aside for a second. The first one is a divide of access to healthcare. So a lot of segments of our society, whether it's based on race or location or economic means, don't have the same level of access to healthcare that other people may have. So that's the fundamental problem in healthcare delivery. But then we have another layer of problem, which I would say is the other side of this divide and doesn't get talked about enough, is that there is inequality in outcomes. So sometimes that section of society or people may have the same amount of access, but their health outcomes are materially different. And that's, led to the recognition for a long time now is the social determinants of risk. So are you in the same city, but you are in a food desert, as an example, or there is so much crime in your neighborhood that you just can't go for walks, or there are no parks, something that we take for granted in the Twin Cities. We have blessed with so many parks. Well, what if you live in a place there is no footpath or there is no parks around you for you to get out and, get healthy? So digital offers us an opportunity to reduce the divide related to access through telehealth and virtual and other means. But it also offers an opportunity through data to have better outcomes for everybody we serve. However, if we don't look at it as a problem to actively solve with purpose, digital can easily become, and in some cases is becoming, another reason to have the divide, as you spoke about. So one example that I like to share is that when the pandemic started, the feds appropriately made emergency measures where a video visit and a telephone visit get equally reimbursed to a physical visit with a doctor. That's essential. But now what a lot of people are saying, well, the telephone visit isn't the same quality as a video visit, so we should keep the video visit parity in payments, but we should take away the telephone visit. And to me, that causes a lot of consternation because even in our own state of Minnesota, there are large swaths. People with means don't have access to good internet. And then there are people without means who obviously don't have access to internet. And then there is a technology level of ease that may not exist. I see it in my own family. My dad is very facile with technology. My mother is not. So every time she has to have a video visit, my dad has to help her. Well, what happens when he's not there? So those are the things that we have to keep front and center. I don't have a solution in a box to offer in the moment, but I just want to create awareness that do not underestimate the level of divide we have from access to healthcare and the outcomes in healthcare, and how digital truly has the potential to solve for it in US and globally. But if we ignore it, or we think that that problem does not exist, or it's not an important problem for us to think about, then we will just add to the problem. Sorry, Rob.
Yeah, and just to quickly add to that, I mean, I think fundamentally, like, internet access is like air and water and electricity. It's basically across the world. I mean, this has to be a human right. Like, you just need to have access to that, because you can't function in this economy, in this age, without that, right? So I think it's the responsibility of governments to start with, and then on top of that, everything that the private sector can do to complement that, right, I think should and can be done, and it should be a priority. I mean, I think, and we have seen with COVID, this is just like surfaced again, like everything else. Oh yeah, you can take a class on Zoom, but what if you don't have access to internet? If you're living in and vast swaths of rural America have really, really weak or no internet access, actually. Which is a shocker for somebody like me, grew up in a small village in Rajasthan, where if I go there now, I mean, I think people have access to pretty good technology, actually, right? Every villager is on a smartphone in some senses, right? In many parts of the world, right? So this is, something that we just have to get it right. And I think, to your point, and I know we're sort of, hitting close on time. I mean, I think at the Carlson School, one of the initiatives that I'm really proud to spend my time on is the Analytics for Good Institute, right? So we actually spend, a significant amount of time trying to take the power of AI and machine learning to solve societal problems, right? A lot of our work has been right now with the Hennepin County, predicting evictions from low-income housing. Right now we're in the process of actually developing models and developing actions based on those models to predict, forfeitures for people that are not going to be able to meet their tax obligations for their homes, right? There are hundreds of people every year who fall at risk of being evicted because they can't even pay the tax on their homes, right? And once the relief from the government gets over, this problem is going to blow up, and we're trying to get ahead of that. So, a lot more to say on this, but any final thoughts or questions, Nora? I mean, before we wrap up, I think we're closing on the hour.
I think Ravi, we're at the top of the hour. So Professor Bapna and Dr. Badlani, thank you so much for your incredible insights on so many different topics related to digital transformation. We're very grateful. We'd like to thank the audience. Thanks to all our alumni, business partners, friends who've joined us this morning, this afternoon, this evening. We would like to let you know that our next event will be on April 16th. That will feature a panel of industry leaders on the topic of advancing diversity, equity, and inclusion. A nice transition from this last question we were discussing right now. We welcome your feedback. There is a link to a brief evaluation in the chat. We'll also be sending a follow-up email, and we'd like to thank you very much for joining us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.